What would you do if your family thought you were their biggest failure while you were secretly running a $200 million company? Meet Olivia Parker. At 36, she still sits at the kids' table during family gatherings. Watching her sister Jessica bask in praise for her latest corporate promotion. For 12 years, Olivia has endured the pitying looks, the career advice, and the constant reminders that she should get a real job like Jessica. What her family doesn't know, their underachieving daughter is actually the CEO of Acumen Solutions, a tech empire employing 500 people worldwide. And she's about to acquire Jessica's company. When Jessica's boss unexpectedly appears at their family barbecue and recognizes Olivia as the CEO, everything explodes. Years of carefully hidden success collide with family assumptions, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about love, success, and what it really means to support each other. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from being underestimated. But what happens when the secret's finally out? I'm Olivia Parker, 36 years old, and until 3 hours ago, my family thought I was their biggest disappointment. Sitting at what my mother still calls the kids' table at our annual family barbecue, I watched my older sister Jessica command attention at the main table, regaling everyone with stories of her recent promotion to senior director at Morgan Financial Group. The executive committee specifically chose me to lead the Asian market's expansion, Jessica was saying, her diamond bracelet catching the afternoon sunlight as she gestured. William Reynolds himself said my presentation was exactly what the company needed. My mother beamed with pride. We always knew Jessica would go far. Such leadership qualities, even as a child. I took a sip of my iced tea and glanced at my phone. 3 missed calls from my chief operating officer, Grace Chen. The Morgan Financial acquisition papers were probably ready for final review. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Jessica celebrated managing a $50 million portfolio, I was about to sign documents that would make my company a 40% stakeholder in her entire firm. Olivia, put that phone away, my mother called from across the patio. Family time is for family, not whatever little crisis your website business is having. Several relatives chuckled. At 36, I still felt like a scolded teenager whenever my mother used that tone. I slipped the phone into my pocket and forced a smile. Sorry, Mom. The truth was, I'd stopped trying to explain my work to them years ago. Acumen Solutions, my little website business, employed 500 people across 4 countries and was valued at just over $200 million. But every time I'd attempted to share my successes, I'd been met with skepticism, subtle mockery, or outright dismissal. My cousin Tyler wandered over, beer in hand. So Liv, still doing the computer thing, my buddy's startup just got some funding. Maybe you should network with him, might be good for your little project. I nodded politely. Thanks, I'll keep that in mind. What Tyler didn't know was that his buddy's big funding round was probably smaller than what my company spent on office coffee each month. But correcting him would only invite more condescending advice. The afternoon continued with its familiar rhythm, Jessica holding court, my parents hanging on her every word, and me existing on the periphery. It was a dance we'd performed for decades, and I'd long since stopped expecting the music to change. That's when William Reynolds walked through the garden gate. I recognized him immediately. We'd been in video conferences twice a week for the past 3 months, hammering out the details of the acquisition. But seeing him here, in my parents' backyard, was jarring. He looked exactly as he did on screen, distinguished silver hair, perfectly tailored casual wear, and the kind of presence that made rooms quieter when he entered. Jessica shot up from her chair, smoothing her sundress. William, you made it. I'm so honored you take time from your weekend to meet my family. He smiled politely, but his eyes were already scanning the gathering. When his gaze found me sitting at the kids' table between my teenage cousin and my perpetually unemployed uncle, his expression shifted to surprise. Olivia Parker, he said, moving past a confused Jessica toward where I sat. I wasn't expecting to see you here. The patio fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Every eye tracked this unexpected interaction. I felt my stomach drop as William extended his hand toward me. Ms. Parker, he continued, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent gathering. What a pleasant surprise. I was just reviewing the final acquisition documents this morning. I stood slowly, acutely aware of the shocked faces surrounding us. Hello, William. Nice to see you in person after all our calls. Jessica's face had gone completely pale. You, you know my sister. William looked between us, realization dawning. Your sister, Olivia Parker, is your sister. He chuckled, though it sounded strained. Well, that certainly explains the resemblance, though I never would have made the connection from our business dealings. My father stepped forward, confusion written across his features. Business dealings I don't understand. William turned to him, eyebrows raised. Mr. Parker, surely you're aware that your daughter's company, Acumen Solutions, has been negotiating to acquire a significant stake in Morgan Financial Group. The collective gasp was audible. Jessica swayed slightly, and her husband, Kenneth, moved quickly to steady her. Acquire, Jessica repeated faintly. That's impossible. Morgan is worth approximately $300 million at current market valuation, William finished for her. The board approved Acumen's acquisition of a 40% stake yesterday. It's a significant investment, certainly, but well within Miss Parker's company's capabilities. My mother sank into the nearest chair. But Olivia runs a little website business, she said weakly. William's laugh was genuine, assuming she was joking. Hardly, Mrs. Parker. Your daughter founded Acumen Solutions 12 years ago. The company is currently valued at over $200 million and employs more than 500 people across 4 continents. Every eye in the gathering turned to me. The expressions ranged from shock to disbelief to dawning embarrassment. Is this true? My father asked, his voice uncharacteristically small. I nodded simply. It is. 10 years earlier. You got the contract. Jessica's voice was sharp with disbelief. We were sitting in our parents' living room during Christmas break, and I just mentioned that my 3-person startup had landed a $2 million software development deal with a major nonprofit consortium. Yes, I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. It's our biggest contract yet. We're going to need to hire 6 more developers. My father looked up from his newspaper. $2 million, Olivia. Don't exaggerate. It makes you sound desperate. I'm not exaggerating, Dad. I have the signed contracts. Honey, my mother interrupted gently, we know you're working hard, but there's no need to make up stories to compete with Jessica's accomplishments. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I'm not making anything up. I can show you the... Jessica laughed, not entirely kindly. Liv, you don't need to fantasize about being successful. There's nothing wrong with having a small business. Not everyone can work for a Fortune 500 company. Momesin. But I'm telling the truth, I insisted, pulling out my laptop. Look, here's the contract. Here's the press release from the client. Oh, sweetheart, my mother said, not even glancing at the screen. You're so creative. Maybe you should consider writing fiction instead of this computer hobby. That was the moment I decided to stop trying. Over the following months, as my company grew from 3 employees to 15, I learned to deflect questions about my work, When relatives asked what I did, I'd say software development and quickly change the subject. When my parents introduced me to their friends, I became our daughter who works with computers. The worst part wasn't their disbelief, it was their pity. They genuinely thought I was delusional, creating elaborate fantasies to cope with professional disappointment. The kindness in their condescension was almost worse than outright mockery would have been. So I built my empire in silence. I started using my initials, O. M. Parker, on all business documents and press releases. When Forbes wanted to feature me in their 30 under 30 list, I declined. When tech conferences invited me to speak, I sent my CTO instead. I bought modest clothes, drove a sensible car, and lived in what appeared to be a simple apartment that happened to be a renovated penthouse in the most exclusive part of downtown Seattle. The only person who knew the truth was Kenneth, Jessica's husband. As a pediatric surgeon, he understood that success came in many forms. During a family dinner 3 years ago, he'd quietly asked me about my work, actually listened to my answers, and later researched my company online. "Why don't you tell them?" he'd asked during a private moment at Michael's birthday party. Would they believe me? I'd replied. His silence was answer enough. By my 30th birthday, Acumen Solutions had grown beyond my wildest early dreams. We'd started as a platform for nonprofit organizations to manage their resources more efficiently. But as our technology proved its worth, we expanded into healthcare systems, government contracts, and eventually financial services. Our breakthrough came when we developed an integrated platform that could help underserved communities access essential services. Instead of nonprofits, hospitals, and financial institutions operating in silos, our software created bridges that allowed them to share resources and coordinate support for the people who needed it most. The work was meaningful, challenging, and profitable. More importantly, it was exactly what I'd always wanted to do: use technology to solve real problems for real people. But at family gatherings, I remained Olivia who works with computers. Last Christmas, when my uncle asked what I did for a living, I tried one more time to explain. I run a technology company that develops integrated platforms for service coordination. His eyes glazed over immediately. So, like, it's support? Not exactly. My company just hired an IT guy. My cousin Rachel interjected. Maybe you could send him your resume. They might be hiring. I'd given up and gone to help my mother in the kitchen instead. The invisibility had its advantages. I could make decisions without family pressure or unsolicited advice. I could fail privately and succeed quietly. Most importantly, I could define success on my own terms without constantly defending my choices. But it also meant sitting at the kids' table while Jessica received praise for achievements that, while admirable, were a fraction of what I'd accomplished. It meant listening to financial advice from people who earned less in a year than my company spent on health insurance for our employees. It meant being treated like a child well into my 30s. Still, I told myself the trade-off was worth it. I had built something I was proud of, on my own terms, without their validation or interference. Their opinion of my success didn't change the reality of what I'd achieved. Or so I thought, until William Reynolds walked into our backyard and shattered my carefully maintained anonymity. The silence following William's revelation stretched until it became uncomfortable. Jessica was the first to find her voice, though it emerged as barely a whisper. "You're acquiring my company." The hurt in her voice was unmistakable. "I've spent 8 years climbing every rung of that ladder, and you just buy it." "It's not personal, Jess," I said gently. "Morgan has infrastructure and client relationships that align with our expansion goals. It's a strategic acquisition, nothing more, nothing personal." Jessica's voice rose. You're becoming my boss. And you didn't think to mention it through all those family dinners where I talked about my promotion, my projects. You just sat there knowing you were negotiating to own part of my company. The accusation hung between us, highlighting years of complicated family dynamics. I looked around at the faces staring at us. My parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all waiting for my response. Would you have believed me if I'd told you? I asked quietly. Her silence was telling. William, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding, attempted to smooth over the moment. Perhaps I should take my leave. Jessica, we can discuss any concerns you have about the transition during regular business hours. Wait, my father said, still processing the information. Olivia, if your company is really worth $200 million, why didn't you ever tell us we could have helped, advised you? I felt a familiar flash of hurt. Like you advised me to get a real job or to follow Jessica's path instead of pursuing my own vision. We were trying to protect you, my mother protested. The business world is harsh, especially for women. We didn't want you to be disappointed. But protection should never mean dismissing someone's dreams. I replied. It should mean supporting them even when you don't understand the path they've chosen. Kenneth spoke up, his voice gentle but firm. If I may, Eleanor, Olivia did try to share her successes over the years. Remember last Christmas when she mentioned her company's healthcare platform? You changed the subject to ask when she was getting a real job with benefits. My mother's face flushed. How were we supposed to know her work was actually important? Because in this family, Kenneth continued, importance has always been measured by how loudly it's announced, not by its actual value. The truth of his words settled over the gathering like a heavy blanket. Jessica looked between me and William, professional panic overtaking family drama. This doesn't affect my position, does it? The promotion I just received. William hesitated. That will ultimately be decided by the integration team and Ms. Parker's leadership. But I will say, your sister doesn't strike me as someone who makes business decisions based on personal feelings. All eyes turned to me again. The weight of their expectations, their fears, their hopes, their years of underestimation pressed down on my shoulders. The acquisition isn't about Jessica, I confirmed. It's about creating better systems to serve underserved markets. Personnel decisions will be based on merit and organizational needs, nothing else. Jessica didn't look reassured. But you'll be my boss. My little sister will be my boss. Technically, I'll be your boss's boss's boss, I corrected gently. Day-to-day operations will continue under the current management structure, at least initially. My father, ever focused on the bottom line, seemed to be mentally recalculating my place in his world. $200 million, he murmured. Olivia, if we'd known, we could have been proud of you all along. You could have been proud of me anyway, I said quietly. Success isn't only measured in dollars. Dad, I've been working on meaningful projects, helping communities, building something I believe in. That should have been enough. The conversation was interrupted by William discreetly checking his watch. I really should take my leave. This has been illuminating. Jessica. We'll speak Monday about the transition timeline. As he departed, the carefully orchestrated family gathering had completely dissolved. In its place was something raw and uncertain, but perhaps more honest than anything we'd shared in years. After William left, Jessica disappeared immediately, with Kenneth following close behind. I found them in our old shared bedroom upstairs, Jessica sitting rigidly on the edge of my childhood bed, while Kenneth stood by the window. Can we talk? I asked from the doorway. Jessica looked up, her expression a volatile mix of hurt anger, and embarrassment. 12 years, she said quietly. 12 years I've been the successful one, the daughter they were proud of. And it turns out you've been, what, laughing at me this whole time? I stepped into the room and closed the door behind me. I was never laughing at you. Jess, weren't you? Her voice cracked slightly. Every family dinner where I talked about my achievements, every time I got a promotion or closed a big deal, you just sat there knowing you'd already accomplished 10 times more than I ever would. That's not how I saw it. How did you see it? She demanded, standing up to face me. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you deliberately let me embarrass myself for years. Kenneth cleared his throat gently. Jess, maybe we should. No, she cut him off. I need to understand this. Why, Olivia? Why let us all think you were struggling when you were secretly building an empire? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully, because every time I tried to share my successes, I was either ignored, dismissed, or accused of exaggerating. Do you remember Christmas 4 years ago when I mentioned landing a major government contract? Jessica frowned, clearly not remembering. Dad said I was getting ahead of myself, and Mom suggested I focus on finding a stable job like yours instead, so I stopped trying. But you could have insisted. I did insist. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. For years, I insisted. I showed contracts, press clippings, financial statements, and every single time, I was either told I was exaggerating or accused of making things up to compete with you. Jessica's anger faltered slightly. I, I, I don't remember it that way. Of course you don't, I said, not unkindly. You were getting all the attention and validation you wanted. Why would you notice that I was being systematically dismissed? Kenneth moved closer to Jessica, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. Your sister has a point. Jess, I've watched this family dynamic for 5 years. Olivia's achievements were never given the same consideration as yours. But she never fought for recognition, Jessica protested. She just accepted it. What was I supposed to do? I asked. Stage a coup at Christmas dinner. Demand equal attention. That's not who I am, and you know it. Jessica was quiet for a long moment, processing. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more vulnerable. I always thought I was the successful one, the daughter who had it all figured out. Finding out you've been so far ahead all along, it makes me question everything I thought I knew about myself. Success isn't a competition, Jess, I said gently. We're on different paths, but that doesn't make either path less valid. Says the woman who just bought 40% of my company, she replied, but there was less venom in it now. I didn't buy it to control you or to prove a point. I assured her. Morgan Financial has capabilities that complement our expansion plans. It's business, not personal revenge. Jessica sank back onto the bed. But it feels personal. It feels like you've been watching me celebrate achievements that are meaningless compared to what you've built. Your achievements aren't meaningless, I said, sitting beside her. You've worked hard. You've earned your promotions, and you're good at what you do. The fact that my company is larger doesn't diminish your success, doesn't it? She asked quietly. Because right now, it feels like my entire career has been amateur hour compared to your secret empire. Kenneth sat on Jessica's other side. Maybe this is an opportunity, he suggested. You've both been operating in separate worlds. Now you have a chance to work together, to support each other instead of competing. Jessica looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What happens to us now as sisters? I mean, how do we get past this? I don't know, I admitted, but I'd like to try if you're willing. She nodded slowly. I think, I think I need some time to process all this, but I don't want to lose my sister over a business deal. You won't, I promised. Whatever else happens, we'll figure out how to be family. The next few weeks were some of the most challenging of my life. Word about the acquisition spread quickly through our extended family and social circles, creating ripple effects I hadn't anticipated. My parents were dealing with their own crisis of recognition. Friends and acquaintances who had heard about Olivia's little computer business for years were now asking pointed questions about how they could have been so oblivious to their daughter's success. The Hendersons asked us about it at dinner last night, my mother told me during a tense phone call. They'd read about the Morgan acquisition in the Wall Street Journal. I didn't know what to say. You could tell them the truth, I suggested. That you didn't know because I stopped sharing professional news with the family years ago. That makes us look like terrible parents, she protested. Mom, I'm not trying to make you look bad, but I'm also not going to pretend that this situation developed in a vacuum. My father was struggling with his own adjustment. As a man who had built his identity around financial success and business acumen, having a daughter who had quietly surpassed his achievements while he remained oblivious was a blow to his self-image. I should have seen it, he told me during one of our difficult conversations. The signs were probably there. I couldn't see past my own assumptions. Jessica was having the hardest time of all. The acquisition had been announced publicly, and her colleagues at Morgan were struggling to understand how their senior director's little sister had suddenly become a major stakeholder in their company. It's awkward, she admitted during one of our weekly coffee meetings. People keep asking me if I knew, if I had inside information about the deal. And when I tell them I had no idea, they look at me like I'm either lying or completely oblivious. I'm sorry you're dealing with that, I said sincerely. I never wanted the acquisition to create professional difficulties for you. I know, she sighed. It's just hard. I've spent years building my reputation, and now everyone's questioning whether my achievements are actually mine or somehow connected to your success. It was during this conversation that Jessica asked me the question that would lead to our biggest crisis yet. Can I ask you something? She said, stirring her latte absently. When you were negotiating the acquisition, did you know I was working on the Peterson account? The Peterson account was a mid-sized nonprofit organization that wanted to integrate their financial management with their service delivery systems. It was exactly the kind of client that would benefit from Acumen's integrated platform, and it was one of the accounts I'd been most interested in when we started looking at Morgan. Yes, I said carefully. It was actually one of the factors that made Morgan attractive to us. Jessica's expression shifted. So you knew that if the acquisition went through, the Peterson account would essentially transfer to your company. Well, yes, and you knew I'd been working on that account for 8 months, that it was going to be the cornerstone of my promotion portfolio. I could see where this was heading, and my stomach started to sink. Jess, the acquisition isn't about any single account. But you knew, she interrupted. You knew that buying into Morgan would essentially take away the biggest success of my career and transfer it to your company. It's not that simple, isn't it? Her voice was rising, drawing looks from other cafe patrons. You bought my company and took my biggest account. How is that not personal? I tried to explain the complex factors that had driven the acquisition decision, but Jessica was no longer listening. She saw it as a deliberate attempt to undermine her career, and I couldn't find words to convince her otherwise. The conversation ended with Jessica storming out, leaving me sitting alone with two untouched lattes and the sinking realization that our relationship might be damaged beyond repair. 3 weeks after the coffee shop confrontation, I received a call that changed everything. Grace, my COO, sounded unusually tense. We have a problem with the Morrison Project, she said without preamble. The Morrison Project was a relatively small contract, a $2 million software implementation for a network of community health centers. It wasn't significant enough to impact our bottom line, but it was important to me personally because it represented exactly the kind of work I'd started Acumen to do, helping underserved communities access better services. What kind of problem? I asked. The kind that looks like sabotage. Grace replied grimly. Someone with access to our Morgan financial systems has been systematically undermining the project. Delayed deliverables, corrupted data transfers, miscommunicated requirements. Nothing catastrophic enough to cancel the contract, but enough to make us look incompetent. My blood went cold. Only a handful of people had access to both our systems and Morgan's, and only one of them had a personal motive to see me fail. Are you sure it's deliberate? I've been doing this for 10 years. Olivia, this isn't coincidence or incompetence. Someone is actively trying to make this project fail. I spent the next 2 days conducting a quiet investigation. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. Every major setback in the Morrison project could be traced back to actions taken by someone with Jessica's access credentials. The question was what to do about it. From a purely business perspective, the answer was clear. Sabotage was grounds for immediate termination, regardless of family relationships. But Jessica was my sister, and firing her would destroy any chance of rebuilding our relationship. I called an emergency meeting with my senior leadership team. Grace, my CTO David Chin, and my head of HR, Marcus Johnson, gathered in my office on a rainy Thursday afternoon. We need to discuss the Morrison situation, I began. Grace pulled out a thick folder. I've documented everything. The pattern is clear. Someone has been systematically undermining the project for 3 weeks. Marcus leaned forward. Do we know who? We have strong suspicions, I said carefully. But before we proceed, I need to disclose that the person in question is my sister. The room fell silent. David was the first to speak. Olivia, you know I respect you immensely, but we can't let family relationships compromise our professional integrity. I agree, I said, which is why I'm asking for your counsel. What would you do if this were any other employee? Immediate termination, Grace said without hesitation. Sabotage is unforgivable, especially when it impacts our ability to serve vulnerable communities. Marcus nodded. From an HR perspective, we have no choice. If we let this slide because of your family relationship, it sets a dangerous precedent. I stared out the window at the rain, wrestling with the decision. Finally, I turned back to my team. Set up a meeting with Jessica for tomorrow morning. I'll handle this personally. Are you sure you want to do the termination yourself? Marcus asked gently. I'm not going to terminate her, I said. Not yet. I'm going to give her a chance to explain herself, and if she can't provide a satisfactory explanation, then we'll discuss next steps. Grace looked concerned. Olivia, if you're too close to this situation, I'm not, I interrupted. But I believe in giving people the opportunity to account for their actions before making irreversible decisions. Jessica arrived at my office the next morning looking professional but tense. She'd never visited Acumen's headquarters before, and I could see her taking in the modern design, the bustling activity, the tangible evidence of the company I'd built. Impressive, she said as she settled into the chair across from my desk. I can see why you're proud of this place. Thank you, I replied, then got straight to the point. Jess, we need to talk about the Morrison project. Her expression didn't change, but I caught a slight tightening around her eyes. What about it? I opened the folder Grace had prepared and slid it across the desk. We've been experiencing systematic problems with the project for the past 3 weeks. Delays, data corruption, miscommunications, all traceable to actions taken with your access credentials. Jessica picked up the folder and flipped through it slowly. Her face remained carefully neutral as she reviewed the evidence. This could be coincidence, she said finally. Or maybe your systems aren't as secure as you think. It could be, I agreed. But it's not. We both know it's not. She closed the folder and met my eyes directly. What are you asking me, Olivia? I'm asking you to tell me the truth. Did you deliberately sabotage the Morrison project? The silence stretched between us. I could hear the muffled sounds of the office beyond my door. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the normal rhythm of business. Finally, Jessica spoke. Yes. The simple admission hit me harder than I'd expected. Despite the evidence, part of me had hoped for a different explanation. Why? I asked quietly. Jessica's composed facade finally cracked. Because I needed to know if you were actually as good as everyone says you are, or if you just got lucky by sabotaging a project that serves community health centers. It was just a small project, she said defensively. Nothing that would really hurt anyone. That project serves 50,000 people. Jess, low-income families who depend on those health centers for basic medical care. How is that nothing? For the first time, Jessica looked genuinely shaken. I I didn't think about it that way. I was focused on the business side, not the impact. And what exactly were you hoping to prove? That you're not perfect. The words burst out of her. Everyone acts like you're this brilliant CEO who can do no wrong. I wanted to see how you'd handle a real crisis, whether you'd crumble under pressure like a normal person. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process her reasoning. So you decided to create a crisis to test me. I know how it sounds, she said miserably. But living in your shadow for the past few months has been difficult. Everyone at Morgan talks about how lucky they are to be acquired by the brilliant Olivia Parker. Do you know what it's like to hear that every day about your little sister? I imagine it's similar to what I felt like growing up in your shadow, I replied gently. But I never tried to sabotage your career. Jessica's face flushed. That's different. You chose to hide your success. I never asked to be overshadowed. Jess, success isn't a zero-sum game. My achievements don't diminish yours. Don't they? She challenged. Because right now, it feels like everything I've worked for is meaningless compared to what you've built. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. You know what I have to do now, don't you? Fire me, she said quietly. I should fire you. I corrected. Sabotage is grounds for immediate termination, and you've put both companies at risk. But I turned back to face her. But you're my sister, and I believe people deserve second chances when they're genuinely remorseful. Jessica looked surprised. You're not going to fire me. I'm going to transfer you to a different division where you can't access our integrated systems. You'll report to David Chen instead of your current supervisor, and you'll be on probation for 6 months. Any further problems, and you're out. That's more generous than I deserve. Yes, it is, I agreed. But it's also contingent on you fixing the Morrison project. You're going to work with Grace to undo every bit of damage you caused, on your own time, without additional compensation. Jessica nodded slowly. I can do that. And Jess, this can't happen again. I'm willing to forgive once, but I won't tolerate having my professional integrity compromised by family drama. I understand, she said quietly. And Olivia, I'm sorry. I was angry and confused, but that doesn't excuse what I did. No, it doesn't, I agreed. But apology accepted. Just when I thought we'd weathered the worst of the family drama, a new crisis emerged from an unexpected direction. It started with a phone call from my PR manager, Sarah Kim, on a Friday evening. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. TechCrunch is running a story Monday morning about the Morgan acquisition. They're calling it The Secret CEO: How Olivia Parker Built a $200 million Empire While Her Family Thought She Was Unemployed. My heart sank. How did they get that information? Someone talked. The article includes quotes from family sources describing years of holiday dinners where you were treated like the family failure. It's not flattering to anyone involved. I closed my eyes, imagining the humiliation my parents would feel when their friends read about their inability to recognize their daughter's success. How bad is it? Bad. They paint you as vindictive for hiding your success, and your family as oblivious at best, deliberately cruel at worst. There's also speculation about whether the Morrison project delays were caused by internal family conflicts. The Morrison situation had been resolved quietly, but apparently not quietly enough. If the press connected Jessica's sabotage to the acquisition, it could damage both companies' reputations. "What do you recommend, Shayi?" "Full transparency," Sarah said immediately. "Get ahead of the story with your own narrative. Explain the family dynamics. Acknowledge the complexity, but control the message." I spent the weekend drafting a statement with Sarah's help. It was delicate work. I needed to be honest about the situation without throwing my family under the bus or revealing details about Jessica's sabotage. On Sunday evening, I called my parents to warn them about the impending article. "How bad is it?" my mother asked, her voice small. "It's not going to be pleasant reading," I admitted, "but Sarah thinks we can manage the fallout if we respond appropriately." "What kind of response?" my father asked. "I'm going to give an interview explaining the situation from my perspective. I'll be honest about the family dynamics, but I won't attack anyone personally." There was a long pause. Then my mother said, "What can we do to help?" The question surprised me. For weeks, my parents had been focused on their own embarrassment and confusion. This was the first time they'd asked how they could support me through a crisis. "Actually," I said slowly, "there is something. Would you be willing to do a joint interview to share your perspective on what happened?" Another pause. "You want us to admit publicly that we didn't support your career?" my father asked. "I want you to be honest about our family dynamics." I replied, "The story is going to come out anyway. We can either let TechCrunch control the narrative, or we can tell our own story." My parents agreed, and we spent Monday morning in Sarah's office preparing for interviews with three major business publications. The questions were tough but fair, and both my parents surprised me with their willingness to take responsibility for their part in the situation. "We made assumptions about what success looked like," my father told the Forbes reporter. "We were so focused on traditional markers of achievement that we couldn't see the extraordinary work our daughter was doing right in front.